This is episode number 172. Today we're featuring pastel artist Kim Lordier.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome to the PleinAir Podcast. I am loving my freedom. Here in Texas, we're open for business, and life has resumed in a new normal. Best of all, it's springtime. It's painting season, and I've managed to sneak out and get some painting done, which is a good day for me as far as I'm concerned. Still keeping my social distancing with friends, but it's nice to paint with friends again. I'm working on my greens. I'm inspired by the great Russian landscape artists like Shishkin and Levitan, and I've been doing copies out of their books so I can master greens like they have. And then I'm going out and seeing if I can do it on location when I'm looking at greens that don't look the same as the greens I'm producing. It's challenging, but it's also lots of fun, and I'm happiest when I'm growing. Speaking of fun, there's going to be a grand celebration, everybody in the plein air world, when we're allowed to get together again this August, the plein air convention, kind of the center of the plein air universe. We will celebrate our friendships and our love and passion for plein air painting at the plein air convention. Now, we might be doing jazz hands instead of hugs. It's hard to know. We don't know what the requirements are going to be, but we'll be together painting, learning, being with our tribe of painters, and we have a powerful lineup of faculty and over 600 registered guests for the new date already in August. And remember, it's our first and only summertime conference. So if you're a summertime person, the only time you can get out is summertime. If you're a school teacher or something like that, this is the time. And we've rolled back prices so that you can still come. We have plenty of seats at the moment, but that will expire soon. That price will, and as soon as we hit our limit, then of course we can't let anybody else in. But go ahead, get registered, and know that we have our COVID guarantee, meaning that if there is a change or cancellation based on our ability to get together, you'll have the ability to apply your money to next year's convention or a future convention, or rescheduled or something else, or get a cancellation. And if you're new to plein air painting and you want to learn more about it, we have a free ebook called 240 Plein Air Tips, and you can get it for free at pleinairtips.com. And of course, coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering your art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. Speaking of tips, you're going to get some great ones with this interview, the amazing Kim Lordier. Kim Lordier, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Hi, Eric. How you doing today?
I am excited because I've been wanting to talk to you. I think this is a good opportunity to let everybody get to know you a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure people want to know the real me, but I'll pretend as much as I can here.
Well, this is a real good time to reveal what the real you might be.
Okay, cool.
Do you have any dark secrets that you need to talk about?
Let's see. Let me scratch that one out. Probably not at this point.
Okay. All right. So, Kim, for the people who may or may not be familiar, because people are listening all over the world, tell everybody what it is that you do.
Well, I'm a mom, but on my painting, primarily a pastelist who paints in the field and in the studio.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're a mom. Tell us about that.
We have a great 15-year-old son, right around the age of your triplets, right?
Mine are 18.
Okay. I got a couple. So balancing the whole mom and painting and husband and house has been a part of my journey for the last 15 years or so.
So let's talk about that, because I think that's an important discussion to have. How do you balance that? Because you have managed to build a national reputation. You're in some very fine top-tier galleries. You have been on stage teaching at the PleinAir convention. You do lots of workshops, and yet you're still pulling all of that off. How do you do it?
Well, first and foremost, I'm grateful to my family. When Ryan, our boy, was really super young, I had my mother-in-law and my mom who would step up one day a week and give me a few hours to devote to my painting. And I kind of took Ryan out plein air painting in his stroller when he was little, and I've had a tremendous support system, and I'm very grateful. And my husband's very supportive about what I do as well. Very grateful.
So you really took the attitude as, I'm not going to let anything stop me or get in the way of this.
No, that's kind of the selfish side of me.
Well, it's the old sitting on the airplane when they say, when the mask drops, give yourself oxygen first. You have to have the ability to, painting gives you oxygen. Painting is part of your DNA. It's
my life. That's absolutely the truth. Yeah.
How did this journey begin? When did you start first learning that you had interest in becoming an artist?
Well, I kind of had the fifth grade. I don't know if we really want to go back that far.
Well, I know it's a long journey, but let's go there.
Oh, wow. I was kind of a horse freak from birth. And so when I was little, I was always drawing horses and actually pretending to be a horse, which is kind of silly. Wow. Okay, here goes one of those secrets that wasn't supposed to get out.
All right.
Anyway, I was drawing, and in fifth grade, a couple of my drawings or crayon drawings ended up in our local newspaper. And I think that kind of outside acknowledgement, even at that early age, kind of sparked that realization that, oh, maybe I can do this. And I've just, for the most part, dabbled in it until high school. And then I started, was an active horse show. I traveled to California. Oh, boy, I'm mumbling here. I would go to horse shows and started painting animal portraits for people. And that kind of turned into a little bit of a way to help pay for my horse habit as a young adult. And
so
then
did you have a horse?
Yes, we at one point we had 4 or 5 horses during my growing up years. And my grandfather raised and trained running quarter horses before I was born, and he gave me my first horse when I was 9 years of age. And that kind of led me down that. In fact, the horse that he gave me my mom was pregnant with me when she rode that horse when she was pregnant with me. And that was my first horse back at age 9. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. And I was going to mention earlier about the idea of being in the newspaper. Sometimes I like to stop and just point things out because I think they're really important. That story about recognition is one I hear a lot here on the podcast, that somebody got some recognition from a school teacher at a young age, or an article, or somebody put their painting up on the wall, or parents' encouragement. And those things are what people latched onto that made them interested in having a career. Yeah,
I know it certainly spurred me along. And when I was doing the animal portraits, that kind of thing, the emotional call when somebody saw their horse or their, loved dog in a painting, they'd cry, and it speaks to you, and I guess I realized at an earlier age that emotional tie was important, so that correlation between the doing of something that you absolutely love, that you end up in kind of in that Zen-like state where the world goes away. There's no trouble in your painting, and then somebody sees what you've done, and you, whether it's a memory or something you spark in somebody else, it's a beautiful connection to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened after Horse Portrait Land? What did you continue to do that for a while, or?
I studied at the Academy of Art, went straight from high school to the Academy of Art in San Francisco and studied commercial illustration, which I just thoroughly did terrible at, kind of cut most of my classes and barely made it through. I was very insecure there about my work and my internal drive about, putting my work out there. And so I became a flight attendant after that. And I continued to do the animal portraits during college and during being a flight attendant while I was flying. And I also showed horses up until my early 40s. So that helped. That, I don't know, I kept with it. But it really wasn't until like around 2001 and 9/11 that I found my absolute passion and the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing today. So
how did that happen?
Well, three things kind of came into play at that point in time. I had been doing the animal portraits, but I saw my first early California Impressionist exhibition at the Oakland Museum. It's a traveling show from California's Nature Conservancy and the Irvine Museum. And at that time, I was also just starting to learn how to paint plein air from a local teacher here. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. And so we were on as a flight attendant, I was given took a volunteer furlough. And so all those things kind of culminated around in the same time frame. And seeing the early California Impressionists was really the first time I was brought to my knees with art, or with art. I mean, I'd been to the Louvre, I'd been to the Met, I'd been, several beautiful museums, but this was really the first time I saw a group body of work that really just turned me on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had a very similar reaction to that. So were there some of the artists that you can recall that really cranked your clock?
Well, there's one particular painting by Edgar Payne. It was this golden colors of a sycamore tree and this kind of circular composition. And it just drew me in right into this beautiful turquoise, green, blue back little color note. And it was the color, but it was also the tone. It was just this marriage of kind of tonalism and broken color from the French Impressionists that just came together. And it just really, it was the first time I just had to sit down and stare at a painting for, I don't even know how long. Guy Rose, William Ritchell, Franz Bischoff, Percy Gray at the time, his watercolors, very much more tonal. But that, I think the tonalists and the California Impressionists just really, I don't know, it's just amazing. It just really resonated within me.
And do you consider yourself a tonalist today?
It's funny. I have elements, I think, of both. At the moment in time when I walk into my studio, particularly this period of time that we've been in for the last month or so, I've been exploring tone and color, and to a much deeper level. So I'm not sure. I'm kind of both. I love both, and but right now, what you'd see if you walked into my studio doors would be a lot more kind of a tonalist flair and what I've been experimenting with.
Okay. So, what was the first time you went outside and painted? Was it prompted by that exhibit?
No, I had started with the class prior to that. I saw this woman. I belonged to a local art group, the Society of Western Artists, and this woman gave a demonstration, a plein air demonstration, and the only time I'd ever painted outside prior to that was when I was in college, and it was just this overwhelming, oh my gosh, I cannot handle this feeling, because we were at the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, and the architecture and, it's just overwhelming. The fountains, the water, the reflections, the people. I just never felt comfortable in that environment. But when I saw this lady, her name's Brigitte Kurt, she gave this painting demo outside, and her enthusiasm and love and passion of what she was doing, I just saw her and I felt this sense of, I'm meant to do this. And I started taking a class with her outdoors and in oil. And I very quickly realized that, I still love my pastels, and found a way that she was working in the oil. That's how I started doing my underpainting process with my pastels, and started working outside on location in my medium.
Interesting. We were interesting parallel lives, because I was in the Bay Area during 9/11, and it was about that time that I started playing with the idea of going outdoors to paint, and then eventually started PleinAir Magazine and so on. And we were maybe 20 minutes apart, but didn't know each other.
No. Well, I wasn't, there was no reason. It was a small community, but, I know you were across the bay and I was on the peninsula, and I do know that I still have my very first copy of the PleinAir magazine, and I was so thankful that you brought the magazine back.
It's a collector's item. Hang on to it. You can get a whopping $23 for it on eBay.
They're going nowhere.
So, it's interesting, because at that time, I don't know if it was the case for you, but for me, I didn't know that there was such a thing as plein air painting. I certainly didn't know that there were any people doing it, and it took me a long time to kind of stumble into the few people who were out there doing it. And I don't think there were a lot. It's changed a lot in the last 15 years. Dramatically, yeah. My very first plein air event, I was pregnant with my son, so that was 2004, was Carmel Art Festival. And I started painting with Brigitte probably, well, it was somewhere around 2001. And so in that, I think that was a pretty quick amount of time it was pretty fast. That time. I lost my train. Sorry. You were talking a little bit about, getting used to figuring out how to paint in the elements, and it was so overwhelming because of all of the stimuli, right? The fountains, the water, the sky, the beauty up there. Of course, up there at the Palace of Fine Arts, it's about one of the most beautiful spots in the world. And so what do you tell your students now? How do you deal with getting all that stimuli and figuring out what you're going to paint, what you're going to ignore? Do you have a process that you recommend?
Definitely. I mean, if you're setting up out there, it's big shapes, no detail, and a lot of people do thumbnail drawings. I do what I do note-hands with these 3 value pens, and I really need to see things. I now see things in shape and light and dark because of that. And when I teach a workshop, that's what we start out with, is almost an entire day of just understanding value and shapes.
So explain a notan for those who might not know. Give it a little bit more depth.
Okay. I learned about notan from Eric Rhoads, who has put together the Virtual Art Academy. I had a workshop with him a long time ago, and he taught me the process with the pens. So notan is a Japanese term that's loosely defined as light and dark design, black and white, narrow focus on your values and shapes.
So you're breaking it down to 3 values?
3 to 4 values at the most, and so I have a number 5 value, a light value, and a dark value, and then the white of your sketch paper. And so I try and have people squint and break down their shapes to the simplest form, compressing values, so that people start to see in terms of design and value first before. The hardest thing, I think, when you're out on location or even working from photo reference, which I do as well, it's so easy to get caught up in the object that you're painting and naming it, and therefore you start rendering it versus thinking of it in terms of design and value first. And if you think about it in terms of design and value first, that really helps to emphasize what your concept or the idea that you want to express. It really helps to support that. And it's easier to move elements around that don't support your idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So how much teaching are you doing?
Not very much.
You don't have time, do you?
Well, I don't have time. And it's funny, there's so many great teachers out there, artists/teachers. I still feel like I have tremendous work to do myself to understand. I'm very aware of my weaknesses and strengths in my own painting. And so the teaching part comes very unnaturally to me, I think. In terms of, I'm more than happy to share what I know or what I understand in my particular process. But like if somebody were to come to me, one of the things that people have said to me that they love about my work is my color, but I'm not a color theorist in any way. Color is very emotional for me. And so to try and explain, what I think about color theory is I don't really go there in my head ever. So it's hard to teach that. So that I think that it's easier for me to teach the idea of value and design and those types of things. But I guess to answer your question, once I get into the teaching mode, I love it. But to get to there, it's difficult for me. So I don't teach a whole lot.
So what are the principles that you find people have the most trouble with that you try to help them through?
Was that a question?
Yeah, in terms of, let's say when you're teaching, what kinds of things do you find consistently people struggling with that you're trying to help them overcome? Well,
I mean, I think, many artists who are teaching find that, the drawing skills are really the first and foremost things. I don't really teach drawing per se, because that's something my draftsmanship still needs work on a tremendous amount. But really, if somebody's going to take a workshop from me, I see value, atmospheric perspective, and design really being the places that I can help somebody.
So talk about, I like to always have a couple of tidbits in here for people who are at different levels, because you have, we're well over a couple million downloads now. We've got people listening all over the world, and we never know what stage someone is in their process. Some are curious, they're just learning, others are pretty far along, others are professional. But I like to have a couple tidbits in there for those people who are kind of trying to learn. So give me a couple of thoughts on atmospheric perspective. It's a term a lot of people wouldn't even know, but you do it beautifully. So perhaps you could kind of touch on what it is and how to accomplish it. Obviously, it's different depending on the scene.
Oh, absolutely. And also, I have a tendency in my own work to push the colors. Let's see, how would I say that?
Exaggerate?
Yeah, I would in my own work, if I'm seeing more of let's say we're talking about a scene where there's, you're at the ocean and you've got a lot of spray and mist that diffuses the values and shapes as they go back into space. And sometimes it can look to the eye as you travel back in space, it gets a little bit less clear. And sometimes I'll create a little bit more of a cleaner color in the background to help create a feeling of light and sense of depth. That really doesn't make much sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at your website while you're talking about this, and I see that your atmospheric perspective is wonderful, and I can see so many areas where it feels to me like you probably pushed it considerably, and it really works. I don't know very many artists who do that. I know a few, and every time they create a painting, it just makes it so much stronger because they're creating that sense of mystique or that sense of space.
As opposed to the fundamentals of how to create, the warms and cools and how the color drops off and it cools off and grays down and your contrast gets closer together as you drop back in space. But I think one of the things that I've been working on, with students in that is in terms of teaching is kind of, pushing your idea and understanding that it's your world that you're creating. When you're there, when I'm on location, I am trying to develop the feeling of the moment in time that I'm out there, and but I also, allow myself to infuse my own spirit into that. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think that's what I try and push in my workshops is to teach that people need to trust themselves and their instincts. And, I don't want to change who they are as an individual in terms of how they make their marks. But I'd like to help be a guide to, make suggestions for them about pushing ideas a little bit further.
Well, you have to, I think you have to help people understand that they've got to get the basic premises of painting down,
right,
before they can go too crazy and be too creative. So there's a fine balance. I remember going to a photo workshop and complaining to the instructor that I wanted to go out and take photos because he had us working on some technology stuff. He said, look, you cannot be free and accomplish what you see in your heart or your mind. You can't accomplish it until you know the technology and how the technology works. You need to be able to know, how do I make this foreground darker than it appears, or how, et cetera. And I think the same is very clear with painting. So, there's that fine line between go ahead and be creative now, but you need to learn these basics.
I absolutely 100% agree. But one of the things in teaching, I've found over the years, because I'm more self-taught than anything, is that people sign up for a workshop for many different reasons, and I have learned to send out a pre-workshop questionnaire to find out why people are taking my workshop. That helps me to set up my curriculum. And not everybody's always there to learn the fundamentals. So I think it's important for me to tap into the individual.
Absolutely.
And so if somebody really wants to have a deeper understanding of value and NOTAN, I push everybody through those foundational things about design, shape, values, and at the beginning of every workshop that I teach. And then, but then when it comes time for people to be more expressive and we go out on location or they're working from their photo reference, I don't want to change the way or who they are. I just want them to note things that are off, maybe compositionally, or, understand what happens when you're traveling back in space. If there's too dark of a value back there, you're popping that hole, you're losing miles in your painting. So I try and really work with the individual versus it just being a classic, where, we're learning, atmospheric perspective today, and tomorrow we're learning, that kind of thing. I don't think I teach a traditional workshop. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, that's
okay.
Good. It sounds to me like it's very customized, which is really important. So you said something else I want to probe a little bit, because I love to probe these things. But when people, they will call me and they'll say, Eric, she said that, but you didn't ask that question. You talked about contrast and how the contrast gets closer together when things change. Do you want to articulate that a little bit?
So in terms of atmospheric perspective, the greatest degree of contrast in values is the closer an object is to you. You have a greater degree of contrast on an object, or let's talk about like a bank of trees in the midground, and then the same type of tree is 5 miles back in the distance. When the light's hitting it in the middle ground trees, and there's a certain degree of contrast of light and dark. And when you travel back in space, that 5 miles, there's still the same light that's hitting the trees if there's no clouds, but the contrast of light and dark gets closer together as you travel back in space. So there's not as great a degree in value shift as well as temperature shift. The temperatures get a little bit closer together as you travel back in space as well. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Good. All right. So talk to me about pastel, because a lot of people listening to this are trying to figure out what their thing is going to be. What was it about pastel that pulled you in?
I've worked in pastel since I was 15 years old. It's a yummy place. I love opening up my box and looking at the candy store of choice of colors. Whether it's my outdoor kit or my kit in the studio, it's my security blanket, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
I understand the medium. I know what it's going to do. I even had, and a lot of folks, that I've talked to, I love painting in oil as well. I don't get the same amount of time to do it. And at one period of time in the earlier part of my career, I'm very fortunate to have a mentor and good friend in John Stern, the executive director of the Irvine Museum, now UCI. I approached him one day and kind of asked his thoughts on, this is going to sound terrible, but I asked him, I go, Jean, to be a real artist, should I be painting in oil? And he looked at me and he just shook his head and he says, Kim, you just keep making a name for yourself and go down in history as a pastel artist. You don't need to be, it's not the medium that's going to make or break you. Paint what you love and paint with what you love. And that was some very, very beautiful advice that he gave to me. And
so why did you even raise the question? What was it that prompted you to think that?
Because historically, works under glass have not been perceived as relevant as oil painting in a traditional sense.
I don't think that Percy Gray had that problem. Do you?
No, but he painted in oil too.
Yeah, but his watercolors are very desirable.
Yes, but at the time, I still, the valuation of them is less than, well, not now that he's no longer with us. But I think I went into my career. There's two sides of my career, and then there's my creative journey. I try and really actually keep them very separate. And so in terms of the career part, I think that's why I felt compelled to ask Jean, his feelings about that. And
so what if he had said, yeah, Kim, you have to become an oil painter and you have to focus on oil painting? What would have happened then?
I honestly couldn't tell you because, the fits and starts that I've had at time at the easel with oil painting, which I love anytime I get to paint the figure or I do a still life or do something outside of my traditional genre. I use that opportunity to paint in oil, but I always come back to what feels right in my hand, and that's the pastels. And I do feel I am confident enough in my own creativity now, and even back then when I had that question, I knew pastels were my medium. So.
You said something earlier, and I just wanted to probe that too. Is you were talking about broken color. Obviously, the Impressionists were the ones who invented this idea of broken color. How important is that to you?
I think broken color, based on top of a sound tonal value structure, is everything for me. That is why I truly believe the early California, when I was exposed to the early California Impressionists, they really brought me to my knees. It's just seeing luscious, rich color and with this strong sense of design. The Taos artists had that. In Pennsylvania Impressionists, while they have beautiful broken color based on strong tone, the early California Impressionists and then the more kind of illustrative Taos artists, they really played with color. And for me, those two things are, I think, part and parcel to who I am on the inside as a creative person. That's what I'm drawn to. And those two things are everything to me. So, not to mention the Russian artists, that's a whole, I don't know. That's just,
you need to come with us to Russia. I'm taking a group in September of 21.
That would be,
we're going to go to all the museums and go paint in the countryside. It's going to be pretty cool. So, in terms of broken color, any advice to people on how to use it and how it's oftentimes misused?
Oh boy, that I don't know if
don't have enough time.
well, I don't know if I have an intelligent comment on that, other than I think broken color. It really depends on what your concept and why you're using that. You know, if it's to be to create a sense of iridescence or depth in a painting. You know, when I think of broken color, I also think of more loose brushwork, but that comes from, you know, being, you know, success with that comes with being a fabulous draftsman. So there's so much goes into that idea. I guess I don't think of it just as a impressionist thing, because we still, even as a tonalist, you're still laying one color on top of another. So I don't know if I can answer that intelligently.
Okay. Talk to me about your process and the stages of painting.
I'll do not so much now. I see imagery in terms of value and shape, and that's so I will talk. My favorite, I've kind of coined this phrase. I call it drive-by painting, and it's, you know, that time when you're driving down the road and you glance out the window and you're going at 80 miles, 55, and you see all these elements, light, dark, shape, come together like in a second, and then in 2 seconds that whole thing is blown apart and gone. And that's being aware of what your inner sensibilities are about how shape and light and dark come together. And so that's how I see now over the years of painting. And so when I'm out on location or, you know, flipping through my photo reference, I see something that resonates with me that way. And then I'll either do a note tan or think about the structure and what I want to say. And I did write in. I'm not a thumbnail girl. I don't care to do a lot of preparatory work in creating a painting. So I dig right in, use a hard pastel to lay out my design, and then I do what is a traditional oil painting process of creating an underpainting, and I do that with pastel, a hard pastel, and turpenoid, and a hog bristle brush. And the larger the brush, the better, because I am able to just keep large shapes. So you're
turning it into a liquid and creating a kind of a wash.
Absolutely. It'll look like when it dries in about 5 to 8 minutes. Excuse me. And then it looks like a traditional oil painting. It looks like or a watercolor, the beginning of a watercolor study.
So what's the difference between a hard pastel and a soft pastel? One's hard, but what else?
The density of it. So a hard pastel feels more similar to, and they're generally longer in shape and they feel more like a drawing tool, where a soft pastel is usually much stubbier and much softer. So it lays, when you lay a stroke down on your surface, a lot more of the pastel digs into the tooth of the paper. Okay. And so that kind of comes towards the end of the process, using those thicker pastels.
Cool. All right, so you're laying in an underpainting, and then you're going in and laying on soft pastel on top of the underpainting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I'll refine my shapes, and then I let the painting sit for a while. If I'm in the studio, on location, I'll call them down and dirties. I get it done as quick as possible, not finished, but get the information that I want, and then I'm on to the next. I don't like to finish stuff on location. I just want to bring that kind of guttural mark making and choices made, and bring those back into the studio to have access to.
So do you ever paint from photographs?
Yes, all the time.
And how do you make sure that your photographs don't look photographic?
Oh, my photographs do look photographic because they're photographs.
Oh, I'm sorry, your paintings.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I couldn't.
Oh, you're smart. You're smart, Alec. I get it. All right.
Yeah. You see the real side of me, I think.
So, is it because of the plein air experience that you're just able to interpret photographs so that they feel more like they're in natural light? Because obviously photographs lie.
Right. Well, I probably if you spoke to a photographer, they would beg to differ about the lying part of that. But I do state that definitely when I teach my workshops. So the photos for me are definitely a starting point. They pretty much, I stopped looking at them probably after the initial work gets, when they're a starting point for me. They're an inspiration, a jumping point. So I rely on them, but they also get pushed into the background. I use my, on location studies, and I have, spent a fair amount of time out painting outside, and my muscle memory, building that up, so all of that kind of comes into play.
Now let's talk about career, because you've turned an early interest into a career, a hobby into a living. That's not easy, is it?
I don't know if easy. It's definitely work, but it's not work in the form of drudgery. It's the highs and lows. It's the roller coaster ride of painting, but it's also I guess when I started painting from life, I never really intended. My intention was not to be in galleries nor to sell my artwork. My intention at that time was, to get better, and that's really still now is my intention, is to get better and to understand more and understand deeper. On the flip side of that, I've been very blessed with being, accepted into shows and having these amazing gallery folks support me and work so hard to sell my work. And, that kind of came along with the journey. It's not something I strived for. And I don't know if that sounds counterintuitive. Well, it's probably, that's definitely not marketing 101. I know myself to be, I'm naturally competitive. So early on I was submitting, paintings to magazine shows, prior to, PleinAir magazine being in existence. I was getting the Pastel journal, and they had, a competition, and so I'd submit to that, and the Artist magazine, where Steve Doherty at the time, before he came on with you guys, he was the editor for that, and they had theirs, and so I've always kind of put my work out there to see where it's stuck, and I've been very fortunate to see it stick a few times.
So to that point about competitions. I think you also made another interesting point, and that is that you put yourself out there even though you didn't have the confidence, you didn't know. What's driving you, knowing that there may be better painters putting their work into a competition? What's driving you to do it anyway?
So I want to go back to the first PleinAir convention. You had your
I'd like to go back too, because I'd be 9 years younger.
right? But your first marketing boot camp, the question that you put out to the audience, like, completely blew me away. And you mentioned you can only pick one. Do you want to be famous, rich? Do you want to have your work in a museum collection, respect from your peers, or leave your mark in art history? I will never, ever forget that. And I realized at that point in time, and I'd already kind of, been in the industry for quite a while, but I realized that while I may never sell another painting, I certainly am not famous. But I think the biggest thing that resonated with me is, from a very early age, I had already decided that I wanted respect from my peers. And the later I get into this, I feel like I want to leave my mark in history. And so that kind of leads down that idea of, on the business side, or the marketing side of what we do, is climbing that proverbial ladder, where you have shows and awards and magazine articles, and you're trying to get gallery representation and name branding and the notoriety. All those things come into play. But that is also, there's also a perception about that proverbial ladder. And
what perception is that?
Well, I think the ladder has it's hard on social media to see. Sometimes it's difficult to see all the great things that are happening to other people, and you want to try and avoid climbing somebody else's ladder. And you need to bring it back home and really relish your own climb up each rung. I also had great advice from John Stern to not be in a hurry to get to the top of what I thought the top of my ladder looks like. The perceptions out there can get you can get too caught up in that. So I think staying grounded and knowing who you are as an individual, and if you're super sensitive about, critique and that kind of thing, it's figuring out who you can trust to give you honest feedback without, tearing you I can't say that on a podcast.
You can, sure, you can say it, but I'm sure some people might be offended.
Yeah. So the implication there, if you know what I mean. I think knowing that the rungs to that proverbial ladder are really unique to your individual journey. And
and I think, to the point you talked about before from Art Marketing Boot Camp, if you would imagine that there's a barn, and the top of the journey is the barn, and you've got a ladder leaning up against the barn, and there's 5 barns on the farm, and a lot of people are running up one ladder, then they're running down, and then they're running up another ladder, then they're running down, because they're trying to do it all. And as a result, they never get to the top, versus somebody who just keeps climbing those rungs steadily and consistently, and then they get to the top. And then when they get to the top, they might go, well, now I also would like to get museum recognition. So then they work on that, so one ladder begets another ladder in some cases, but they're not always the same one. And I think that there's this perception among many of us in this world that we have to do this because others are doing it. I ran into some people. I was coaching some people at Fall Color Week one year, and this guy said, I want to talk to you about how to sell my work and how to get it moving. And I said, do you need to do that? He said, no. I said, why do you want to do it? He said, because I thought I had to. And I said, no, you don't have to. You're allowed to continue to be a hobbyist and just be the best hobbyist you can be. You don't have to sell your work. And I think that we all tend to get a little distracted about, what is my purpose? Why am I doing this?
I absolutely agree. And I think, for some folks, some folks have I'm very tunnel. I've always been very tunnel vision about my movement forward. I really haven't been distracted by too many other things that way. And maybe that makes me a little bit boring, but I understand that is part of my core. For somebody else who's, coming up in the industry right now and has all these different avenues and choices to make and to go down, that's exciting. But I think it's being self-aware of what your personal process is. And we're so kind of bombarded with all this information now, thanks to the internet, and it's harder to keep focus, I think, a little bit, especially for a younger generation.
Well, you have to be willing to ask yourself why, if you're climbing to the top, you have to ask yourself, why am I climbing to the top? What's it going to feel like when I get there? And is that what I really want? Because so many people do that climb and then they get there and it's like, I can refer to you right now to a painter. I won't mention a name, but it's a painter who was doing 12 or 15 plein air shows a year. And this painter called me one time and said, I'm doing all these shows. I'm getting a lot of recognition. I'm selling a lot of artwork. I hate my life.
Wow. Because
of the life that was required to be able to do that. This person had to be away from the family, was on the road constantly, was alone a lot, et cetera. And so you really have to kind of ask yourself about purpose before you go after these things.
Well, I think that's why that comment or that suggestion you made, back at that first plein air convention was so triggering for me, because I realized I kind of made that decision a long time ago, but I was never aware of it. And I think that really helped me to focus or to understand. And it's really helping me actually now, understand where I sit in the industry that this has actually become, and where I didn't feel like it was an industry back then, but I just wasn't as exposed to stuff, back then when I was kind of starting. So, but it still comes down to understanding who you are and how you're driven. If you're somebody that loves experimenting and trying new things I wish I had a little element of that, where I had, was able to go down different roads with abandon, but I don't. So
why not?
I think the whole idea of the security blanket, the comfort zone, but what I get out of that, Eric, is a sense of peace and love. When I'm painting, when I go into my studio or I'm setting up my gear and just grounding my toes into the sand at the beach to paint, there's just this powerful, I don't know, energy or exchange that happens.
What was the most painful thing that you ever went through in your life?
Most painful.
Childbirth?
No, that's physical pain. I think mental pain is way worse than.
Yeah, well, of course. But let's use this analogy. Go right with me on this. Okay, so let's say it's childbirth. Maybe it's not.
We're going to go to here. Okay, great.
So you had this enormous discomfort for close to a year. You had this issue of giving birth and the pain that goes with that. And from that pain, you developed the most wonderful thing that ever happened in your life, right? There's just absolutely nothing better. And this is where pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones is really important, because it's not, you can always go back to your comfort zone, But you can't get to growth without pushing yourself out there and experimenting a little bit and trying new things.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that I don't experiment or push myself, but I always end up coming back down a certain lane. And I think that's, if you trust your instincts, and you have to trust your instincts, you have, because your instincts will take you down a road of learning solid work or creating solid work. If you experiment and then you come back, and you experiment and then come back, I think that belief that trusting your instincts allows you to move down that path. And that's when the doors for, success, that's the road that you're meant to walk. So I don't disagree with it's important to experiment and to try new things and get out of your comfort zone. But I think also understanding who you are is really important to
absolutely
go down the right path.
Absolutely. So as we bring this plane in for a landing, do you have any final thoughts or things that you want to share with everybody?
I think, well, thank you very much for all this. I think we all can't do this without the people that support us. I'm very grateful to my family and the people in this industry that have been tremendously supportive, with what we do. And, our world changes constantly, and I feel that happiness comes from within, and we make our own happiness. And I think we need to develop a deep-rooted resilience and a humble satisfaction with our work. And we need to have faith in who we are, and why we step up to the canvas and what we put down on the canvas.
Well said. Now, for people who want to learn more about you, your website is?
It's really long. It's KimLordier.com. But if you just Google Kim Lordier, I should come up.
and Lordier is Lordier. That's
correct.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what I did. I just Googled you. All right. And you have a pretty big show coming up in Carmel, summer of 2020 at Reiser Fine Art.
Yeah, Jim Reiser is...
Reiser, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Jim Reiser owns James J. Reiser Fine Art in Carmel. I've been so honored to be in his space since 2006. And he took a chance on me and my pastels then, and we've had a great, fabulous relationship since then. This will be my third or fourth solo show with him, and we're still kind of working on the particulars right now.
I have to tell you something about him, and that is that, and obviously I mispronounced his name, but I met him way back, probably about the time you were in the Carmel Art Show. And one thing I realized is that he carries, most of what he carries are the early California Impressionists and very few living artists. And I realized that if you're one of the living artists that gets into his gallery, that's really a big deal, because it says that he values your style and your work to feel like it would fit in with those California Impressionists.
For me and my journey, that is one of the biggest honors, is to have a painting hanging alongside Edgar Payne, or, not that I ever would equate my work with Edgar Payne, but, Bischoff, Guy Rose, all those amazing artists. It's pretty special, Eric.
Yeah, it is special, and that's a very special gallery, so congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
Well, Kim, thank you for being on the PleinAir Podcast today. This has been a real pleasure. I think we could talk for hours, and I would encourage people to go and visit your website, check out what you've got, but also to consider pastel painting as an option.
Absolutely. Come to the dusty side for a little while. We'd love to have you.
The dusty side. Well, thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Eric. Have a great day.
Thank you, Kim Lordier. She is one of the most well-loved, most well-respected people in our plein air world because she's such a generous and giving and sweet person. So thank you, Kim. Are you guys ready for some art marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Art Marketing Minute, I try to answer your questions. All you got to do is email them to me, eric@artmarketing.com. Today, both questions come from a listener named David Cruz, whose first question is, at what point in an artist's career do you suggest they try advertising to reach potential buyers? Is it effective for artists still trying to establish themselves, or is it better left to more well-established artists? Well, David, it starts by being ready. And what I mean by that is your work has to be developed and strong enough to sell, and you have to be able to do consistent enough paintings so that your paintings are all pretty much consistent with one another, so you have more winners than losers. And you have to have that confidence to begin as fast as possible and never let up. And what I mean by that is that marketing becomes a lifetime commitment. If you're planning on selling art for your lifetime, you have to plan on marketing for a lifetime. I'm in business. I have to constantly be marketing. The minute I let up, my business stops. I don't have any more customers. That's the same for all artists. Now, there's various forms of marketing. Part B of your question, you said, you ask if it's effective for artists still trying to establish themselves to be marketing, or if it's better for established artists. The answer is, yeah, both. But let me tell you a story about an established artist. He was famous, top of the game, really big deal, making lots of money, selling lots of art. In fact, he had such momentum that he decided he could save all this money on his advertising, and he stopped because everybody knew him. And he was okay for a while because he had a brand, he had some momentum, but his momentum was lost, and within a very short period of time, nothing was selling anymore. And as a matter of fact, he was out of sight and out of mind. All of a sudden, he wasn't being invited into shows. He wasn't being invited into galleries. And as I talk about, there's a thing called attrition. So people are always in and out of the market. The average gallery or artist loses 10% of their potential buyers every year simply because those people are out of the market for some other reason. But there's another group of people who may be coming in if you're refreshing that. Well, he wasn't doing that. And so all of a sudden, nobody knew who he was anymore. He was a has-been. I hate to use those terms, but he became a guy who went from being on top to being on the bottom, making nothing, and nobody knew who he was. He was contacting artists and other galleries, and they were like, "Sorry, don't know who you are." And so he had to reestablish himself and rebuild his career. He lost a lot of momentum, lost a lot of years because he had stopped. The minute you become an artist professional, meaning selling your work, you have to start working on your marketing. Even if it's a year out from when you plan to launch, you need to learn it. You need to make plans. You need to plant seeds. You need to develop strategy. You need to develop a marketing plan. Everything always takes longer than you think it will. We're all optimistic. Things take time, and you have to build momentum. Momentum actually helps sales, but you have to build momentum in the beginning, and it takes time to build momentum and experimentation and trying different things. Marketing is a lifetime commitment. Your next question is, aside from quality, what are the major criteria that buyers look at to determine if a piece of art is worth paying $1,000 versus $10,000 for? Well, it's all perceived value, and perceived value is emotion. As a BMW 7 Series is the same car as a Bentley with a few extra touches, but it's $100,000 more in price. Perceived value comes from branding. and looking successful, and that branding saying that you're successful in subtle ways. It comes from social proof, meaning other people, prominent customers who are buying your work, and it's visible that they are. Social proof could be being in the right gallery. Everybody knows that gallery sells paintings that are expensive. It comes from having courage, and it comes from a slow buildup of a collector base, raising that collector base to buy your work and raising your prices a little bit every year, being invited to the right shows, being seen at the right places. And I saw one artist who had some courage. He put his price out there at $100K. He got it. All of a sudden, he was a $100,000 artist. So you cannot typically launch a career selling $100,000 paintings, although I've seen it done one time, but it was from a famous sculptor who switched to painting and just put a $100,000 price on his first painting and got it. Price is about perception, who you're seen with, being in the right galleries, getting into the right shows, into the most important museums, showing that your work is embraced and accepted at a high value. Now, I go into a lot of depth in my books and videos about pricing, but everything you want to accomplish in your art career, other than your painting ability, can pretty much be accomplished through some form of marketing. It starts with knowing where you want to go, why you want to go there, and then developing your strategy and your plan. I hope that helps. This has been the Art Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
If you've not seen my blog where I talk about art, life, and other such things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee. You can get it for free weekly, but you have to find it. The first one to find is at coffeewitheric.com. A reminder now to book for the August Plein Air Convention. Remember, there's a COVID guarantee, so you can book safely and know that if it's canceled, you're okay. Visit PleinAirConvention.com. This is fun. We'll do it again sometime, God willing, like next week. We'll see you then. I'm Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. Now it's becoming springtime in most parts of America. Of course, if you're listening in Australia, it's becoming winter. So anyway, we'll see you. Go paint. Bye-bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.